Hello my friends, welcome to my channel, Lindy's Magpie Reads. If you're here to hear about books, you're in the right place because I love talking about books and I have finished 7 great books in the past little while, so that's what I'm going to tell you about. 4 of them have trans authors and it's Trans Girl April, so this is kind of like a trans extravaganza video, and I even found a scarf that has trans flag colors in it, so I put it on special for this video. And here we go. First up, When We Were Sisters by Fatima Asghar. Asghar is a poet, non-binary, uses they, them pronouns, and this is their first novel. It is also on the shortlist for the Carol Shields Prize. It's written in vignettes. It's about 3 South Asian sisters living in the US, and they're orphaned when they're still at quite a young age. I'll read you just a little segment to give you a taste of their writing style. Noreen ran the playground. Hands on her hips, legs stuck out, daring anyone to step to her. A ball of force, a little sun, so bright it was hard to stare right at her. Hair wild, sticking out from lopsided pigtails because our dad was our everything, our hairdresser, our chef, our reason for running home at the end of the day. And it seemed no one had ever taught him how to brush hair. We sat in front of him every morning with our mess of nest, twigs sticking straight out, leaves, thin streaks of dal and atta. He would try to run a comb through it, sometimes the plastic breaking off in a tangle, before he put in every sparkly bauble that he could find. Then we'd go to the park by ourselves while he whisked away to work, shouting, "Noreen, you're in charge." Noreen's the big sister, and the voice in this novel is Kauthar, the youngest, who is queer. So is the middle sister. When their father dies, it is an uncle who takes responsibility for them. He is so neglectful. These 3 kids have one tragedy after another. It's a sad, sad life. If you're looking for a book for Miserable May, that Scott of Gunpowder Fiction and Plot and Gemma of Gemma Books are hosting next month, you might think about doing this one. Yeah, pretty sad, pretty tragic. But it's got a lot of style. 4 stars. Next up is a comic that I read in digital format. It's called Greasebats by Archie Bongiovanni, another trans non-binary writer. And this is a series of cartoons, kind of like a more contemporary version of Alison Bechdel's Dykes to Watch Out For. There are mainly 5 friends: Scout, who's a lesbian, Andy, who's genderqueer, Ari, who's a trans woman and asexual, and the 3 of them are roommates. And then they have these 2 other friends, Taylor, a lesbian who's never had a girlfriend. She's in grad school and really awkward. And then there's Gwen, who's bisexual and is a real party girl. The art is mostly monochromatic in tones of gray, but occasionally there are spots of color, like in this panel. You see Andy and Scout. Here we see Ari, and she's reading a book written by a trans woman, a Canadian author, Casey Plett, A Safe Girl to Love, which is, I think that's her first collection of short stories. I like seeing books like this out in the wild. And here's a little bit from a panel that includes both Taylor and Gwen. Taylor is freaking out about going out to a party. I'm not queer enough to be queer. I don't look the part. I can't go to the party. What? That's all in your head. There's no such thing as looking queer. Queer isn't an aesthetic, for crying out loud. Who told you that you need to look gay? Andy? Of course. So that was Grease Bats. And here is another comic format. This one is a graphic memoir, a pros and cons list for strong feelings. It's by Betke-Brunswick. The author is American and identifies as genderqueer using they/them pronouns. In this memoir, they document a pretty short time period, 10 months, that were quite momentous. This is while the author is away at college and comes out as genderqueer, and at the same time, their mother is going through the last 10 months of her life, dying of cancer. And Will and their mother were always very close. There are flashbacks to some of their earlier years together, and there are also some really great scenes to do with their coming out. Their father had a lot harder time with it than their mother. You can see that what the author has done is used penguins to show the characters in their family, and in fact all of the human characters are portrayed as birds of some species or other. Because of the sad content with a mother dying, I think that this decision really works well to add some humor and to lighten the tone. So here's a panel where Will's father is still coming to terms with Will being genderqueer. I talked to Dr. K. He has lots of transgender patients. He said top surgery is quite safe. And he said, "Congrats on having a son. It seems like you want me to change my body." "Not me. And I'm not your son." "Okay, what should I? Kid, child, offspring, progeny?" It's a good reminder not to make assumptions. Lots of different ways of being genderqueer. I also love this panel where we see what is in the fridge during this time when their mother is sick. Kinds of healthy foods, leftovers. I learned a new word from this image, macoons, M-A-C-O-U-N-S, which I discovered is a variety of apple. I don't know why it is that looking at other people's groceries are so interesting, but I had a little interaction recently with Doris of Books, because sometimes she shows her grocery shopping on her BookTube channel, and I don't know, maybe it's just being nosy. Recently, Jen of Remembered Reads talked about why it is that we like reading memoirs, and she said basically it's because we're nosy. So yeah, I guess I'm nosy not only about people's lives but also what they eat. So in addition to being a book for Trans Girl April, this one could also count for People April because it's a memoir. And next up, I have a book that satisfies 3 different readathons going on in April. The book is If You're a Kid Like Gavin, The True Story of a Young Trans Activist. It's by Gavin Grimm and Kyle Lukoff with illustrations by Jay Yang. So the 3 readathons are Trans Girl April, People April, and Picture This 2023, which is a picture book readathon that Shelley Swearingen and Jack of Spread Book Joy are hosting for the second time. All of these booktubers that I'm mentioning, you will find the information and links to their channels down below. It's a great community here on BookTube. So, if you're a kid like Gavin Grimm, you don't choose if you're a boy or a girl. But if you're transgender, like Gavin Grimm, you might choose to talk about it. Illustrations are quite subdued in color. You see Gavin is using the bathroom in the nurse's office. And you might be familiar with Gavin's story. He decided to stand up for himself and fight for his right to use the boys' bathroom. He reached out to the ACLU and talked to other kids who were facing the same thing. And you can look online for more information of how things went for Gavin and for many other kids like him. And there's the lovely trans colors on the end papers of this picture book. So these last 3 books that I've got for you include another picture book biography. This one is called Listen, How Evelyn Glennie, a Deaf Girl, Changed Percussion. And Evelyn Glennie is Scottish. And the author, who's American, is Shannon Stalker. The illustrations are by Devon Holzwarth. I want to tell you, look at the gorgeous end papers. In the author's note at the back, Shannon Shocker says, I'm a musician with reflex sympathetic dystrophy. People like me have difficulty with things like temperature changes and pain. When my condition was at its most intense, raindrops felt like knives, and my right arm became much colder than the rest of me. Many parts of my body even forgot how to sweat. Eventually, covered in ulcers and in a wheelchair, I was given 2 years to live. Like Evelyn Glennie, I heard, "You can't," too many times. But like Evelyn Glennie, I knew I could. And Evelyn Glennie's story is amazing. I'm going to link to a TED Talk that Evelyn Glennie did, because she became deaf when she was still a girl, and that did not stop her from becoming an internationally renowned percussionist. I had never heard of her before, and I'm so glad I picked up this book. Next up is an audiobook for People April, Below the Edge of Darkness, a memoir exploring life and light in the deep sea. It's by Edith Widder, an American scientist who has focused on bioluminescence. I don't know if you've ever seen bioluminescence in the ocean, but it is absolutely magical. It was one time when I was on a boat for 3 days off the coast of New Zealand, and there was luminescent phytoplankton in the water, and it was like turquoise sparkles, and you could interact with them by stirring the ocean. It was like stars were living there in the water. Anyway, Widder is so passionate about the mysteries and wonders of what is in the ocean. And we live on an ocean planet. She says, we haven't explored the ocean because we don't know how marvelous it is in there. And the reason we don't know how magical and wondrous it is because we haven't explored it. A catch-22, really. So she does her darndest in here to capture our interest, as well as talk about how she manages to photograph and record life that is below the level where sunlight reaches down through the waters. So a lot of these creatures are so delicate that if we try to bring them up to the surface to study them, they get cooked on the way up because they're living at really cold temperatures. She also explains why it is that these creatures don't freeze. I found that really interesting too. And some of them are really sort of jelly-like, and so they get crushed. And so with the right instrumentation, we can see what's going on down there and what purpose the bioluminescence serves. It actually has, it does many jobs. So that was really interesting too. Now, being a woman in science, she's faced many of the obstacles that other women have. For example, at Tufts University in 1969, she wanted to transfer from biology into scientific instrumentation. And she was told by the man in charge that he didn't believe women belonged in instrumentation because women don't know how to tinker. Earlier, Widder's former boss at Harvard Medical School had told her that women lacked the spark of genius required for true innovation, and that their proper function in life was to act as stabilizing agents for the heady brilliance of men like himself. I learned so many things from this book, including that mucus is the duct tape of the ocean. How cool is that? Springathon is coming up. I think it's the first 2 weeks of May. Check out the hosts for that readathon, which I will link down below for further details, but you can go to Heidi's channel, Heidi of My Reading Life, or Doris of Aldi Books, or Natalie of Curious Reader. So Springathon is to read books about nature. Okay, this is the last book now that I'm going to tell you about, the best of the bunch, Thick Skin. Field notes from a sister in the Brotherhood, and it is by Hilary Peach. Hilary Peach is also a poet. I will link to a video online where you can hear her reading one of the poems that is about a scene that happens in this book. The poem is Hey Short Britches. Hilary Peach is a boilermaker. She's a welder, and for most of her career, she was the only, or maybe there was one other woman on the job site. There was a lot in here that reminded me of Kate Beaton's book, Ducks, 2 Years in the Oil Sands. Hilary Peach is in Fort McMurray for some of her jobs. She travels all over the place, including to the United States. She has some funny, exasperating moments crossing the border with her paperwork to work in the States as a boilermaker and being told by the customs people that she can't travel with her husband's papers. She really knows how to tell a story and has a great sense of humor. I'm sure that stood her in good stead in the face of the work environments that she was in. But it's not just because of the Fort McMurray connection, but the way she describes, as Kate Beaton does in her book, the particular intimacy of working with people in extreme conditions. Okay. Kitty needs some attention. Oh yeah, another thing in the Kate Beaton book is she talks about the different work camps at Syncrude, and Hilary Peach does that too, where she says some of them are really run down, and everybody wanted to get into Borealis, which Kate Beaton mentions. What I didn't know until I read this book is that Borealis was designed by a famous American prison designer, and it's really saying something that the cream of the crop, the kind of camp that everybody wanted to stay in, was actually designed to be a prison. There's a scene where she's working on a saw table, and she needs to keep going in and checking with a group of men about measurements and figures, and she can't get their attention. And so the fellow that she's working with to saw this sheet metal tells her what to do. And the trick is to extend a tape measure about an arm's length and then hold it at her crotch with the tape pointing outward and wave it around a bit. And sure enough, the guys all stopped working, talking, started looking at her, and she was able to get the information that she needed from them, just with this appendage in front. It's quite a fat memoir, and when it first came in from the library, I thought, oh, I've got so many of the library books. I don't know if I'm going to be able to get to this. And I think I don't have time to read it now, but am I going to want it in the future? So I read a chapter or two. In this case, I read a chapter and I knew immediately that I was not going to stop reading it until it was done. It's that good. It's very funny, but also really thoughtful, and she knows how to put words together. I'm going to give you a taste of her writing by reading a section that is about mental health. So this one is not a funny section, but there's going to be a new readathon happening in May, Mental Health May, hosted by Kim of Middle of the Book March and Marilyn Maya Mendoza. And this book would work for that, as well as People April. Mental illness and addiction thrive in the dark, and the dark is where we keep it. It's ironic that the most stressful, the most dangerous jobs, the ones with the longest hours and most extreme conditions, where people are separated from their families and support systems, are the same jobs that teach us not to show how we feel. Vulnerability is not valued, so people hide their suffering. We suck it up. We don't bleed in the shark pool. And when suffering is hidden, we don't see it. We miss the signals because our skin is too thick. If I could change one thing in construction culture, that would be it. The introduction of a little more tenderness, a little more understanding that we all have our limits, our soft spots, the places where the knife can go too deep. We have all needlessly lost too many friends. Which brings us back to the title of this memoir, Thick Skin. Highly recommend it. And that's it for me today. Thank you so much for watching. I always love to hear from you, so comments down below. Say hello. Tell me if you've read any of these, if you want to read any of these, what you've been reading lately. Have you been doing readathon stuff? People April, Trans Girl April, Picture This, Poetry Month. I don't know if I mentioned this. I think I did. That the first author that I talked about, the first book, When We Were Sisters by Fatima Asghar, they are a poet, and their first collection was called If They Come For Us, and I am going to link to that title poem down below. Poetry. It's good for the soul, good for the mental health. You all take care of yourselves, every precious one of you. Bye for now.